Our final speaker is a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. She has significant experience with education policy. Her research focuses on educational freedom, school choice, and the cultural impact of empowering parents with control over their children's education. She frequently testifies as an expert in state legislatures across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, ABI Talks is proud to present Inez Stepman.
Hi. So as you can see, I am not talking about one of the topics that you would expect, especially because student loans are not eligible for the most part for bankruptcy. That music makes us sound really cool when we come up here, but all I'm thinking about in the previous presentations is how a vodka company in what is my family's home of Poland and Russia and that area could ever go bankrupt at all. So that's my major question. But yes, so we're going to be talking about student loans, which I realize is not on most of your radar in terms of what you're working on because they're not eligible for bankruptcy. So how big is the student loan problem in America today? It's really big. So it just surpassed $1.6 trillion in outstanding loans. That's more than car loans, and that's more than credit card debt. So what makes that debt a little bit different, though, aside from not currently being eligible for bankruptcy, is that most of it is held by the US taxpayer, ultimately. The creditor is the US taxpayer. Under Obama, we cut out the middleman. It used to be a highly regulated loan environment, but some percentage of the loans were private. Now 92% of those loans are actually held by the taxpayer and directly by the Department of Education. So that makes it a little bit different than most debt. And then second, of course, there's nothing to repossess, right? You can't put somebody's college degree up on an auction block. So that makes it a little bit different as well. But it is creating huge problems, especially for folks in my generation. Yes, I'm a millennial, and yes, I have eye-popping student loan debt that I am paying off. So about one in three adults under 30 has student loan debt, some amount of student loan debt. So this is a problem that we're seeing especially for millennials and for Gen Z, but actually the fastest growing segment of student loan debt is among seniors who are taking on the obligations, right, of their children or their grandchildren when they can't pay. So this is not just a problem for young folks. But as you can see in this little cartoon, it is part of the issue, larger issue in the economy where a lot of people in my generation are delaying other purchases, right? Cars, homes, some of these other things. That is to the great disappointment of some folks and spawns a bunch of those articles that we see popping up on Forbes or whatever. Why aren't millennials buying the same number of cars as we used to? Anyway. So this is the growth in student loan debt. It's doubled just since 2006. Right, as a share of national income. So this is a growing problem. Okay, so there's an obvious reason for why it's a growing problem, and that's the cost of university is going up astronomically. I don't want you to be too impressed with the public line there at the bottom. It's just the wide scale of this because the cost of private school is so much higher. That gentle slope up still represents a threefold increase in cost just since 1990, right? So the question then with student loans is not so much this crisis. The answers we've heard to it have been, okay, how do we deal with student loan forgiveness? How do we deal with the fact that a lot of these folks are going to default, right? So currently we expect that 40% of student loan debt will be in default by 2023. So this is not one of those predictions that's out 10 years, 20 years, where a lot of things in the economy could change. In the next 3 years, we'll see 40% of people go into default. And out of the 55% currently who are paying their payments, any kind of payments, right, even income-based repayment, reduced payments for various reasons, only 55% of these student loans are actually in any kind of repayment. So we're going to see this crisis come to a head, and we're going to see a lot of proposals on how to deal with it, and most of those proposals have dealt with forgiveness, right? Bernie Sanders, being the Sandinista that he is, wants to totally forgive all student loan debt for everyone, even private loans, which, as I said, are about 8% of the market, so that's a relatively small chunk of it. Liz Warren has a different plan, right? She wants to forgive up to $50,000 of student loan debt for people who make under $100,000 a year, and then some percentage dependent on between $100,000 and $250,000, some kind of percentage in there depending on how much money you make. She still wants to offer forgiveness up to $250,000. But none of these proposals actually deal with the problem, which is how much college costs and why college has gone so much up compared to other things, right? It doesn't have to be this way. You can see, lots of other products, housing, clothing, phones and accessories, televisions, right, computers. These things have all gone down in terms of cost over time. Healthcare, which we have another huge problem with healthcare cost inflation. Look how much higher. Healthcare is the third one on that list. College and tuition has gone up much, much, much higher even than healthcare costs, right? And this is putting a huge burden on the middle class. So how do we get here? Why is it that college costs so much more than it used to? So we have to go back to the 1960s. This is LBJ giving the Great Society speech in 1964. And this is the first huge intervention of the federal government into how to pay for college, right? So prior to that, we do have the GI Bill, and we have a couple small programs, but those were necessarily limited to service members, right? So this is the first time that the federal government gets into the game of trying to make sure that everyone who can go to college, who has the brightness and works hard and the persistence to go to college, right? Everybody who has those qualities and can make it into college, they should be able to do that, and regardless of what their family makes and whether or not their family can afford to send them to college. All right, that's a really laudable goal. So we passed the Higher Education Act, right? And it begins under Johnson in the 60s, and it goes through a whole series of iterations I'm not going to bore you with, but we still call it the HEA, right, the Higher Education Act. The problem is that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as always, and the actual results of the federal government getting into giving easy loans to folks to go to college has been three primary negative consequences in the student loan market. One is this massive increase in cost. Because if it turns out, if you give a blank check to folks, especially 18-year-olds, to go to college, every year colleges say, okay, well then if every 18-year-old automatically has a $100,000 loan for 4 years from the federal government, we're going to make sure that it costs $120,000, right, for 4 years, because we're sure that your family can find, or you can find a private loan. You guys can scrape together the extra $20,000 on top of what the feds offer. So then the next year, the Fed loans adjust up, and colleges do the same thing. I'm giving a simplistic version of this, but this is what's called the Bennett hypothesis. It was first proposed by Secretary of Education Bill Bennett under Reagan. So back in the 80s, he published a New York Times article saying, hey, look, guys, this sounds really nice. We're giving out loans, and we're subsidizing loans to go to college, and we want kids to be able to go to college, but it's increasing the cost. So the Bennett hypothesis is no longer a hypothesis. It's been confirmed by study after study after study, and the New York Federal Reserve now estimates that for every additional dollar in loans made available by the federal government, college costs increase by 60% of that dollar, so 60 cents, right? So this is pushing the floor up and up and up, and it's on a treadmill every year as those loans adjust upwards, so does college cost. So what's happened then is because so many more people go to college than used to, we're seeing the real devaluation of the high school diploma. So we've seen a remarkable stagnation of median incomes of folks who get the bachelor's degree, actually, since the 1970s. But we've seen an actual decrease in median income among kids who achieve a high school diploma but then do not go on to college. So if you look at, there's been some studies done by some of these massive job posting websites, and they have found that jobs that just 4 years ago did not require a college degree, that same job posting today is much more likely to put that little thing at the bottom and say college degree required, right? So what we're seeing is 40% of grads are in jobs that don't, or at least used to not require a college degree. So we're not actually, getting folks into better jobs, increasing human capital. What we're doing is fueling a credential treadmill. So my friend Neil McCluskey over at the Cato Institute has this beautiful sentence that I'll only paraphrase and probably butcher. But what we've done in the name of trying to make sure that kids from low-income households can go to college with federal student loans is we've actually put everybody on a credentialing treadmill where everybody is running faster and, more importantly for this discussion, taking out massive student loan debt that gets bigger and bigger every year to stay in place, right? To get to the same place in terms of your success after college today, you need a degree in a way that you did not need it 20, 30, 40 years ago. And to get that degree, it costs more than it did 30 years ago. So the kicker for all of this, you might say, well, maybe this is the cost we have to pay to ensure equity in our society. Even the stated goal of the Great Society in getting into this business was to make sure that kids from lower income families would have the same opportunities as kids from higher income families when it comes to college. Regrettably, it is now worse. The relative picture is now worse. We see that actually the share of folks in college who come from the upper income quartiles has actually increased, not decreased. But maybe colleges are delivering something intrinsic, right? So maybe we should be happy that more and more people are going to college, they're getting an education. I'm a philosophy major, right? I'm very open to the idea that maybe colleges are delivering something that is meaningful and intrinsic beyond what we can measure in terms of statistics about what folks are able to do after graduation. Regrettably, they're not delivering a lot for the money on that either, right? We've actually seen since the 1990s proficiency in literacy, right, which we measure by just read a newspaper article and then summarize what it's about, right? We've actually seen, this is already sad, but 40% of college grads in 1990 were able to read an article and summarize accurately what it said, okay, just 40%, so that's sad enough. Today it's 31, right? So as college costs have increased by 3 times, literacy of college grads has plunged by a quarter. So they're not delivering for this enormous amount of money. But what are they delivering? Okay, so this is a lazy river in the University of Missouri, right? So what it has fueled is an enormous boom in college administration, which has gone up by 60% just in the last 10 years, which is, by the way, 10 times more than the number of tenured faculty positions that have opened up in that time. So what we've done is really made sure that colleges can hire a whole ton of administrators to do all kinds of compliance and all kinds of other bureaucratic nonsense, but we haven't actually increased the literacy of grads. We haven't, and by the way, they're not offering substantially more in student aid directly from the university. So they've built a lot of facilities as well. We're looking at now $21 million in new construction, 21 million square feet in new construction in the last 20 years among colleges and universities. And oftentimes that includes things like lazy rivers or rock climbing walls, and they're doing that to attract students because the baseline financial incentives here are to admit more and more students, whether or not, right, they're qualified academically, because as we know, actually only 60% of college entrants, freshmen, actually graduate in 6 years. Not in 4, in 6 years. So that's 40% of kids who are going in and not graduating in 6 years. But there's an incentive to bring in more kids because, hey, they all come with a federal check. So some solutions, right? I said earlier that I'm skeptical of student loan forgiveness solutions because I think it makes the problem worse, right? Colleges and universities, they've already got their money. Students are stuck with debt. And it doesn't actually solve this problem. In fact, making college free makes it worse, right? That just means the government's going to directly write the check to the universities. And the same cost inflationary pressure will continue to push college costs upward. It's just that the taxpayers are going to directly pay for it instead of indirectly pay for it when student loans start to go into default. So what's really needed here is to reintroduce some natural limits, right? We need to either freeze or reduce student loan availability. Now, nobody in Washington wants to hear this because it sounds harsh, but the reality is that we are not going to solve this problem as long as there's always more cash available in the system on the front end. So I think we can also look at some innovative financing. ISAs, income share agreements, is something that Purdue University and a few other universities are looking into, where instead of taking out a lump sum amount and then paying that amount back, you have a set term and a set percentage of a grad's income, right? So you are paying 8% of your income for 10 years. It makes it a lot more predictable for the student, and it shifts the risk onto the people who are best able to manage that risk, right? Folks in banks who are used to making those kind of calculations and are much better at making those kinds of risk assessment calculations than the average 18-year-old. So we need to think about other routes to success. I mean, that could be a whole presentation, of course, in itself, and I won't go too much into it because I'm running out of time. But obviously, this is not the only route to success, and we should stop treating it as such. And then finally, and I think most importantly, we need to give universities an actual stake in how their students do. There's been some proposals in Congress. Senator Josh Hawley has proposed that that 50% of student loan debt, ultimately, if the students default, universities should pay. I think that's a good proposal to start thinking about. But in some policy mechanism, or in some way, we have to get universities to actually have a financial stake in how much money students are taking out to get their degrees. That's it. I'm out of time. So thank you very much. Thanks to ABI for having me.
Thank you, Inez.